I didn't get into crypto to make money. I got into crypto to make freedom. And so that's sort of where my head has been at, is on the infra type stuff, decentralized internet type things. There's lots of ways to make money in the world, but freedom is actually more precious. I've been paying attention to the regulatory people. They're kind of dumb in terms of how they're thinking about it, but that doesn't mean that it's guaranteed to fail. We have to actually not just get out there to stop a bad bill, we have to get out there and propose good ones. We have fixated to this point mostly on technical possible attacks to BTC in terms of mining attacks and so on. The US attacks will be regulatory attacks. The United States is not capable of sending checks to everybody in the mail, right? But it can regulate. That's the angle of attack that we will see coming, I think, from the US, whereas China might be able to do a technical attack. So it might face a two-front war. We'll see.
Digital gold, is that too limiting?
Digital gold is a huge thing, right? Digital gold is the basis of the next financial system, just like gold was the basis of the old financial system. The fundamental question is, will you have a form of digital currency that cannot easily be expropriated, right? If digital gold does make it through in its current form, which I hope it does, it seems limiting, but that's huge. That's trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, What you don't have is something that is an online community that, a social network with a sense of national consciousness and a plan to crowdfund territory. That hasn't been done. How would you go about doing it? Well, you have a virtual reality community with virtual currency built in, and you have a culture there. You have norms. You have a civilization, and you have people building what I call the network state. And you essentially accumulate cryptocurrency in the cloud, and you have individuals and groups being like community founders that will, let's say, crowdfund a ranch in Texas, or they'll crowdfund a building in Japan and so on. And they're all networked together. It's like a fractal polity. Decentralization doesn't mean an absence of leaders, but an abundance of them.
Boom.
All right.
Took a little while to buffer, but we made it. Balaji, how you doing, man?
Good.
Well, we had you tentatively slotted for 8:30 because I know it's either very late or very early where you are. It's unclear because you're in an undisclosed location, and it's good OPSEC to be in the dark room right now because no one knows exactly where you are. But first of all, thank you for joining. So you must have caught my intro. The actual craziest person on the screen for actually reading and annotating that full pile of words that I dropped yesterday. Thank you for taking the time not only to look through that, but also to have this conversation. And we've chatted quite a bit this year. You're full disclosure, I'm a Messari investor, and we're obviously one of the first people to alert folks, including myself, to the threat that the coronavirus posed. And so we spent a lot of time talking about that earlier in the year. But you were also one of the few people that I thought could really speak across all these different themes because you've covered so many of them yourself and have been investing as well and staying current on many of these top trends already. So we're going to talk a little about investment theses. We're going to talk about Bitcoin, Ethereum, DeFi, stablecoins, credit, infrastructure, trends, policy, and then we'll obviously leave time to talk a little bit at a more meta level about some of the things that you're thinking about with policy and potential nation building, as referenced in the report. I don't even know where to start the questions. Right. So the report is so comprehensive. Why don't we start with your initial reactions, aside from the fact that I'm a crazy person, and help me kind of frame where you thought were we on points or was what do you think we either really nailed or really missed in this mammoth post for the folks that are looking for the TLDR?
I don't want to say really well. First, the comprehensive coverage of DeFi was really good. This is probably, I think, the single best overview of a bunch of things that were sort of flying by and Twitter and so on. So especially some of the more obscure stuff in terms of the credit section and so on. So that was good. the thing is that crypto is sort of the meeting place of many different cultures. You have people who are coming in from a tech angle. Your people are coming from a technology, pure technology, then like a venture angle, then like a Wall Street angle, then a freedom angle, right? And so on and so forth. You have different sorts of cultures kind of all blending together. And this was definitely heavy on, and in a good way, it was like, this was the DeFi review. In terms of things that probably I have been thinking more about, I've been thinking, ENS and I think, unstoppable domains and Handshake. Decentralized DNS, I think, is ridiculously important. And I think it hasn't exploded yet. Well, it's doing reasonably well. It's not as big as like the numbers on DeFi Pulse, for the trading stuff. But I think in terms of its medium to long-term significance, because with ENS, it unifies the concept of a domain name and a profile, right? So ryanselkis.eth is both a domain name and a profile, right? And then over time that goes to whatever your pseudonym is .eth, and you can already log into Uniswap and other stuff with an ENS name, so it's already out there. But I think that the full implications of ENS people don't fully understand. It lets you decentralize social networks. It lets you basically work with DNS like you work with a social profile. It unifies things that were previously not unified. So it's very, very, very important. That's one thing which, since you asked what like immediately jumped out to me, just something I've thought a lot about.
And we did cover that a little bit, but it was towards the tail end, so most people probably blacked out before they fully got to
it was in there. It was in there. Yeah,
but not highlighted as maybe a core theme, and we're going to talk about maybe why that's one of the critical building blocks for like a truly decentralized future of the web. And
exactly, that's exactly why I brought it up. That's it.
Yep. So before we go any further, obviously for anyone watching, this is not investment advice. Consult with your financial advisor, so on and so forth. Disclosures. We're all adults here. Please take this for entertainment purposes, which hopefully will keep you entertained. Balaji, you were one of the top 10 people that I had on my list of folks to watch, both in terms of contributions to the industry this year. There was the coronavirus. There was the very calm evisceration of the media and everything you've written about citizen journalism. So
Sure.
You really touched a ton of different topics. When you think about the other folks that you followed closely this year, since it is one of the first that you've spent technically fully outside of crypto, who were the folks that you were watching, keeping tabs on, just so, to use your words, things weren't just totally flying by while your head's down on some of these other core ideas related to the network state?
So that's a great question. I'd say I think a big thing is this is probably the first year I felt that crypto was mature enough to use as a tool, as a component of something else that wasn't crypto for crypto's sake. Do you know what I mean? Like you'd use crypto, but it wouldn't be the headline feature. And it wouldn't be like a crypto company. It's like, for example, you set up a new web app and it's like, you're not an open source company, whereas that would have been, a distinctive factor 20 years ago, maybe. You're right. So what have I been paying attention to? So let's see.
Or who in particular? Yeah. Either who or in terms of companies to watch. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I have, I've been following several of the new layer ones. I'm an investor in a bunch of them. Like Avalanche and, Near Protocol and so on. So, I'm happy that a bunch of those got launched this year. I've certainly been following, perhaps not in extremely close detail, but Vitalik and, the ETH2 launch. It's kind of obvious stuff. But what I've really been thinking about is probably, I've probably been less thinking about crypto this year than I have been thinking about crypto as a component. In the sense of, so I haven't been following many. Should I give you names of individuals I've been following that other people haven't? No, because I haven't been trying to like maximize my DeFi yields or whatever this year. I've been thinking about like what comes next, right? So if you want, I can talk about that, like all my sketches and stuff about what is missing from what's in the not missing from in the doc in the sense of that you omitted it, but what is, I think, something that will be important in 2021 and 2022.
Well, let's skip over that then, because
Sure.
that kind of starts to go into the top 10 trends. For my top trends, for me it was really about the segmentation of the industry. Number one, it's kind of the first year that I felt like you could look at the currencies, you could look at the layer ones, you could look at DeFi, and they were all starting to almost become their own sectors. Whereas in the last cycle, everything was just a single ranked list that everybody was kind of treating like Bitcoin complements. In 2017, this was especially true, and it didn't really make much sense. The second was just Bitcoin's emergence as a macro narrative and a hedge on unprecedented money printing, and then unprecedented levels of negative interest bearing debts. Then the third was kind of all the eyes on Ethereum and everything that came along with it, the stable coins, DeFi assets, and synthetic assets in particular. We're going to go maybe into those one by one, but maybe we'll start with Bitcoin and just your sense on its importance in the market right now, or how much time you're spending on it in particular, because there isn't a whole lot that's going on with Bitcoin other than it exists, it's ossified, and it's really picking up steam from a narrative standpoint in across the globe. Is that accurate? Do you think about it technically, or has everything really moved over to Ethereum at this point?
Yeah. So I mean, I think Bitcoin is a finished product for the most part, and I think WBTC have been impressed with the growth of it this year. It's very simple, but it seems to be doing a lot more volume than Lightning, and it is something which I think is an obvious method for Bitcoin to scale, because other chains and so on will all support docking 10 or 20 million or whatever, $100 million of Bitcoin, like a one-time operation, and then you'll have some sort of way of sending fractions of a Bitcoin within that environment that's sort of being docked into. So that's good, because Bitcoin scaling will be done outside of Bitcoin. I think that's now starting to become clear, and so that's one thing. Number two, though, is
when you say that, is that do you think Bitcoin scaling will be done outside of Bitcoin, as in Bitcoin sidechains, or as in Ethereum wrapped Bitcoin?
Well, Ethereum wrapped Bitcoin is certainly one approach, WBTC, but I do think that the whole interop, the Internet of Chains, right? Yes. That's going to be huge in the years to come, because so WBTC is one version of that, but every new chain that wants to do something, one way I think about it is, once a chain, now we've seen this a couple of times, once a chain gets to a certain level of success, it's sort of optimized for a set of applications, and it's very difficult to really change it outside of that, and so Bitcoin is digital gold. Ethereum is like this financial internet almost, right? And I read your doc, and you're like, the triple point thesis and so on and so forth, but and that's fine, by the way. I think David Hoffman's thesis is fine, but that's the way that I explain Ethereum to people is, imagine you had a financial intranet, and every app on it could send and receive money to every other app natively, and they could all just trade back and forth with each other, right? So an automated Wall Street. And that's what Ethereum is. Now, it also lets you do ENS and so on. So it's more than that. But that alone, just the financial internet, is a big thing. And so what I think happens is, other chains are going to take on other applications, video games or what have you, just because the workloads will be different. A lot will go on Ethereum, but it can't be best for everything, and so it'll go to other chains. And then on those chains, they'll have a way to do a WBTC equivalent. So that's what I mean about how the way Bitcoin scales is off-chain, and it's just relatively infrequent to do Bitcoin transactions. I think it's just like an extremely high. It's a digital gold, right? You load up your system with it infrequently, and then you do, millions and millions of transactions in some high bandwidth way.
Mm-hmm. We're going to talk a lot more about Ethereum and DeFi, so we'll get back to that. But let's stick on Bitcoin for a second. Digital gold, is that too limiting? On the one hand, I think that's the first market to disrupt, and that's the narrative that's really stuck and been the Trojan horse of sorts for Bitcoin to come into the institutional money managers' consciousness. And certainly attracted the likes of Druckenmiller, Bill Miller, Chamath has been in the industry for a while and been a holder of Bitcoin for a while. But a number of high-profile people, I think, have normalized Bitcoin as a 1% to 2% allocation play now, in much the same way that maybe Andreessen and Fred Wilson did in 2013 in terms of making it safe for venture capitalists. The question for me is digital gold limiting, and is that ultimately a narrative that we have to grow out of into something bigger, or does the internet of value, if it is Ethereum, ultimately become bigger?
I don't think so. I mean, the thing is, digital gold is a huge thing, right? Digital gold is the basis of the next financial system, just like gold was the basis of the old financial system. It is, the fundamental question is, will you have a form of digital currency that cannot easily be expropriated, right? Now, there are failure modes, by the way, like, with everything. Have you seen Taleb's Thanksgiving chart?
Mm-hmm.
It's like up and to the right.
The life
and
of
then
the turkey. Mm-hmm.
Life of the turkey, exactly, right? So I always think about, okay, I mean, obviously I'm a huge bull on the whole space, but what kinds of things could go squawk, and have it like kind of come down, right? For example, like China actually just going 0 to 1 in terms of, really attacking BTC. It hasn't been done yet, right? The government has not actually attacked it. It may never do so, but that has to be a risk factor. For example, they could come into your mining and mine empty blocks. They could do things like, put up the Great Firewall and then block port 8333, and then you go back and forth with predator prey, and then you might have something where, because you do port randomization and you try to sneak packets in somehow, and they'll try to do deep packet inspection and so on. So it's possible you get like a chain fork, where there's like the China chain and the rest of the world chain, and then you're playing peekaboo, where most transactions are the rest of the world, but most of the blocks are being extended in China, and that would lead to something where, I don't know, people have to do revert to a quasi-trusted mode. You have to actually, the Bitcoin is no longer the longest chain, right? It is some trusted minor thing, because the longest chain's in China. There are risk factors like that. So I can't say it is home free as digital gold. I do think, however, and I think Nick Carter and I thought about this independently, but the reason I'm pretty bullish on BTC nevertheless is, even if the protocol runs into problems, and no protocol is ever invincible, even if the protocol runs into problems, the ledger is backed up on so many different machines that it would be importable into any other chain. And so I think that there's resilience in terms of, you'll have proof of stake, you'll have mining, with other chains in other countries and so on and so forth. And so the absolute worst case scenario is sort of like a digital Dunkirk, where a bunch of other chains add support to import the Bitcoin ledger as, say, 20% or 50% or whatever. And so your private keys are importable into a bunch of other chains. So the concept of cryptocurrency, I don't think will ever go away, right? That said, if digital gold does make it through in its current form, which I hope it does, it seems limiting, but that's huge. That's trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars,
Mm-hmm. It's a great point that you made at the onset, because I think people look at the digital gold narrative and they see 11 trillion. They don't go back a couple of cycles and have a sense of history where The non-gold standard is very recent, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So
right.
when you talk about hyper Bitcoinization, it's really more hyper digital goldization, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Like this one long-term debt cycle was an anomaly, and the jump from the beginning of that anomaly to the end is basically gold standard, fiat anomaly, digital gold standard.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, I think just putting the finger on that for a second, digital gold, the ceiling of digital gold is not the value of gold. The ceiling of digital gold is like what the modern economy would be if gold were as important to it as it was to the pre-modern world.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's huge, right? That is because it's like the thing that every single country, every company, every entity values. So that's a very, very, very big deal. And that's all you need. Now, the question is, you know, the protocol just wasn't engineered to deal with some of the issues that might arise in terms of, you know, like especially data center mining and so on and so forth. So we'll see if it can endure that. But I am confident that something like a digital gold will win. Because you asked, will ETH, you know, you asked something along those of could ETH exceed BTC or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. You know, I'm not as confident. I mean, this space is so crazy, right? That it's hard to make statements about will A always be less than B. I think you're right that it'd be a huge change in the narrative or what have you. It would show that X was vulnerable when X was not vulnerable, and I hope it doesn't happen. But actually, it's not so much ETH, you know, going beyond BTC. It would be some kind of nation-state attack on BTC that we haven't seen. That's the only thing that could I think stop it. By the way, one important thing, I think you know, you asked earlier about, you know, folks who I was paying attention to this year. I've been paying attention to the regulatory people. So basically, our our counterparts, the people of the state, you know, and if we're the people of the network, the people of the state are kind of the alien to our predator, so to speak. You know, our square up, right? So this, you know, this very stable Genius Act, you know, which I talked about, you know, a little bit on Twitter, right? There's going to be a lot of, you know, they're kind of dumb in terms of how they're thinking about it, but that doesn't mean that it's guaranteed to fail. We have to actually not just get out there to stop a bad bill, we have to get out there and propose good ones. And that's a whole separate topic. But what I'm trying to say is we have fixated to this point mostly on technical possible attacks to BTC in terms of mining attacks and so on. I think China is capable of doing those things. I think the U.S. attacks will be regulatory attacks. The United States is not capable of sending checks to everybody in the mail, right? The United States is not capable of, technically it can't execute anymore at the government level, right? It can't set up a website, but it can regulate. And so that's a one sort of functional component. So that's the angle of attack that we will see coming, I think, from the U.S., whereas China might be able to do a technical attack. So it might face a two-front war. We'll see.
I really like crypto enthusiasts' comments in the chat here. The biggest nation-state attack will be done with a pen, not a computer, a sword. So
Sure.
I like that framing. I also want to unpack the digital Dunkirk thesis, because this isn't necessarily, you know, this year's problem. I'd say you're right. It's about policy, and you know, you don't have to get Al Capone on murder. You can just get him on tax evasion. You know, what's going to be the crypto equivalent of you know, getting folks on tax evasion? It's going to be around self custody and AML, KYC, you know, circumvention, or kind of creating this two-tiered system potentially has already recently been proposed in France or seems imminent, and maybe imminent in the U.S. as well. That, I think, you know, we could talk about more about that when we talk about policy at the end, because I think that really kind of ties everything together, and I've more or less viewed that as you know, the final boss to beat. But let's zoom out for a couple of years, right? Let's say we get through this phase, we do have like a large bull run. Bitcoin is on the kind of global consciousness as part of every portfolio, but then there is a security issue that the leading candidate, I would argue, might be the fact that the security model is uncertain once fees replace seniorage, right? And in a digital Dunkirk, Dunkirk being the movie and the evacuation of from France back to England during World War II. The thing that's not clear to me is that doesn't just go to ETH at that point, right?
No, it doesn't.
It's not going back to England, right? It's going back to 30 different countries, basically, being like
exactly
whatever change are there. So, is that a? Do you think that's if that were to happen, is that a sudden, drastic scurrying, or do you think that plays out and value starts to leak over time, and there's maybe more of a gradual flippening, if you will, or at least a significant bifurcation or trifurcation or ad infinitum of where that value flows and where the Bitcoin ultimately gets ported, because you can't port Bitcoin to Ethereum, Cosmos, Polkadot, whatever, and still have the same net market cap if the underlying Bitcoin network is no longer secure. Then you basically just split the entire the asset and the values more or less permanently on those other chains that are not compromised.
Yeah, it'd be a Tower of Babel moment for the space, right? It'd be similar to like with file sharing, how it went from Napster to Kazaa to BitTorrent and the Pirate Bay and Magnet Links and so on and so forth, right? And it would, I'm not sure if it'd be like a point in time, one time event, right? But I think it would be something where it might just be something that every new chain that boots up, everybody who it's almost like 30% of coins on this new chain are reserved for BTC holders. Here's how to get them, or whatever fraction that is, right? So every new chain and every existing one is able to import the ledger in, and so they're all essentially competing for BTC holder business, right? And I think you'd see that Tower of Babel moment was at least long-term successful when the sum total of all those holdings was greater than what it was prior to the Tower of Babel moment. So, so essentially what I'm trying to say is the idea of cryptocurrency will not disappear from this earth. Any particular implementation, I mean, like it's sort of like a man can be killed, but an idea can't, not very easily. The idea won't die. Any particular implementation, you just have to always be aware of Taleb's Thanksgiving chart.
I want to talk about Ethereum, because that would seem to be the next most likely Dunkirk. Before we do that, let's do a summary of the biggest 2021 risks then. If this Tower of Babel moment is still years in the future, is it all policy, or is there anything else that keeps you up at night, technically or economically, for any of the top markets? I'd say maybe we'll focus on Bitcoin and Ethereum in particular, because those are the ones where if there's a massive issue, then we can pack up our toys and go home for a little while.
Yeah. So it is policy in the West. It is technology plus policy in the East. However, I think that one of my mental models is sorry.
Bless you.
One of my mental models is that in the 20th century, during the Cold War, there was the U.S. versus the USSR, of course, but there was also something called the non-aligned movement, and that was India in particular, but it was basically the folks who didn't want to be pulled in to the whole fight. And India, it was Soviet sympathetic, but definitely it wasn't allied with the Soviet Union, and so it's interesting to think about history repeats, but it doesn't rhyme, or rather rhymes, but it doesn't repeat, where you have the US versus China, but the decentralized movement is like the new non-aligned movement, and that actually turns out to be the most powerful of the three, because roughly 80% of the world is neither American nor Chinese. So I think the biggest win that we could have strategically as a community is, first, really start thinking of ourselves as globally mobile. Okay, like willing to pick. I mean, obviously, if you have a family and so on and so forth, it makes it a little bit harder. I'm not disputing that, but be willing to pick up and move stakes and have fewer possessions if you can. Because if you're globally mobile, and in particular, you're thinking about countries that are neither the U.S. nor China, that I think, if we have, I don't know, 20% of the world economy that's pro crypto, okay, like let's say if we just have one slice, it's not going to go away, right? It'll take a hit, but it's not going to go away. And that's kind of like the non-aligned movement sort of thing. It's neither, U.S. nor China. It's like in the middle. And, maybe that's, for example, like Eastern Europe, which doesn't really want to line up with, communism, but is also becoming increasingly estranged, right? Maybe that's India, or maybe it's, like all these small countries dotted around the map, like Dubai, right? I don't know, but that's how I would look at buffering against the policy risks from the West and the technical and policy risks from the East, which is out of protocol stuff, right? That's non-protocol related stuff.
Do you see significant differences or other blockchains aside from Bitcoin, Ethereum getting any type of major traction or significantly different and more traction in the East or in the Middle East or in these other regions in the non-US, non-China future of crypto?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think, so you mentioned, like, for example, I think Terra, right? Which has gotten, I think, a fair amount of traction in China, not just China, in Korea, rather. And so I do think you're going to see these sort of quasi-national coins, or quasi-national chains that have, for whatever reason, like a good relationship with local authorities or just, cultural things, or maybe their documentation is translated into a particular language. I think you're absolutely going to have pockets like that. So that's one. Number two is I think different kinds of applications. I mean, as great as Ethereum is, it's just not going to be able to handle every kind of application, and so the branding of another chain is being tightly integrated and set up for something. For example, obviously with Zcash and privacy, it's just doing one thing. That's actually pretty important, right? If you have a chain which is just optimized for, let's say, extremely high transaction volume video game stuff, that's going to beat Ethereum for video games, right? So I think that you're going to have workload-specific chains. And just like, for example, you have FTP and SSH and you have different protocols. A lot of it goes over HTTP, don't get me wrong, but there are other protocols.
Zcash is maybe a really interesting segue between Bitcoin and Ethereum, because you think about Bitcoin as like the king cryptocurrency and the one that is most people's starting point when they get into the industry. I would argue that there's limits to how much more private we will ever see Bitcoin get. Like my sense is it will always have to be pseudonymous. The developer is not going to be able to fork in confidential transactions because it will be unsupportable at scale from a regulatory standpoint. That leaves Zcash in this interesting position because ZK Starks and Snarks have actually already been successfully incorporated into Ethereum in a few different projects. So you already have these private anonymized transaction pools that are accumulating in Ethereum using the same technology as Zcash. Is Zcash interesting then, right? Is it interesting to have a pure currency whose primary differentiator is the ability to store value in a shielded pool versus to move money on Ethereum through anonymous transactions, but ultimately onto the same visible ledger?
Yeah, it is. And the reason I'd say that is, this is an analogy, but I don't know if you remember in the late 2000s, early 2010s, people would say, what's Twitter? It's just Facebook status update. It's just one feature of Facebook, And, but actually over time, well, because Twitter was a single graph of being global and because it was default public, that really just led to a different culture of how people use it, In theory, everybody could do Twitter on Facebook where you just set your profile to public and you post everything publicly, right? In practice, there are a bunch of other things you don't want to have, just given how mean people are You don't pull in all of your like your photos and all that type of stuff into like a Twitter fight or whatever, right? And so there's reasons that basically Twitter and Facebook are separate. And what I think actually happens is because Zcash is just privacy, it's just again, Ethereum is great, and it's great that it's got now options for sending private transactions. And I think that's going to become an important part of it. But I think Zcash will just have all of its innovation there, and it gets things like this Zcash message board and so on. So the culture, that's the thing. It's not just the chain; it's the culture around it. What kinds of things people do with it, and so that community is going to drive things that are just going to be different than what Ethereum is. That's how I think about it.
ETH is money. True or false?
I know people like argue about this type of stuff. I've never found it like interesting. It's like, to me, it's like Gmail is mail, like, or whatever. It's the reason is what is money? Obviously, we can go into the definitions and so on, but is it a valuable asset? Yes. I think there's a thesis on how it gains value. I think this year you could say that the idea of ETH as gas, you actually do need to buy ETH for gas, and it's a non-trivial expenditure. That alone gives an intrinsic kind of sink, but it's essentially something where I don't know. I've never found that kind of argument to be very interesting to me. No offense to all the people who find it very interesting online, because just like, will it go up? Is it useful and why? That to me is more interesting. It is certainly the currency of the Ethereum ecosystem. So, and that's a huge ecosystem. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's important for a few reasons, right? One, I'd put Zcash and privacy coins and some of the other forks of Bitcoin into the bona fide cryptocurrency bucket, right? They're ultimately competing for some store of value, money like use case. And then you've got Ethereum, which is just this phenomenally powerful platform that does require some type of security spend just to maintain this network and settle transactions and all of the DeFi applications that we're talking about here. For those that have not read it or that haven't yet gotten to this part of the thesis, because I know it is long, the triple point thesis for Ethereum is basically it's a commodity. It's a money and it's a capital asset that's required for staking,
right? Which is actually not bad. I think it's a pretty decent thing. That's Hoffman's long post with a triangle.
It is. Now the counter to that would be, okay, so you're a little bit good at several things, but you're not great at any one in particular, right? That might be the other way to kind of slam that. At the end of there, we're talking about semantics and memes. And
right.
I think there are folks in the Ethereum community that have tried to brute force this ETH is money narrative, and whether they call it the triple point thesis or whatever, try to get people to think about Ether as a core holding side by side and comparable to Bitcoin, because it has so much more functionality and utility. Bitcoin is optimized for security. Ethereum maybe for utility. Now the question becomes.
Because you had one thing in there where you're like, Ethereum is too complicated to express cleanly to people, and I understand why you would say that, but the way that I express it to people is it's a financial intranet. It's something where every application can send and receive money to every other application, and you can have an automated Wall Street, and that's actually very easy to understand. Go ahead.
Yes, but that's the network, right? That's the protocol. The asset itself.
But ETH is the common. ETH itself is even if stablecoins and other things are used, which are heavily, you have a great graph there showing, the percentage of transactions that are, US like stablecoins like USDC, USDT. Even if that is the case, ETH is just something that every single application on that platform natively has the capability to accept and send, and that'll just give it value, right? Because if you're doing staking, you're going to, probably accept ETH. If you are, having lending, you'll probably support ETH because it's trivial to do that. Every other asset you do is you have to think about it. So, insofar as you have a default. It's like every website will support HTTP and HTTPS. Like now, if you go, for example, to NCBI also supports FTP. That's like an effort to kind of do it. Maybe that's not the best analogy, but you understand what I'm saying. Every website in the US has English support, but it's an effort to then go and add, translation to other languages. So just the fact that every application on this financial internet has ETH support means that ETH is just going to continue to accrue value. That's how I think about it, at least.
Do you think that holds true with this uncertain next couple of years? I think if the Ethereum community is able to get through these milestones in the ETH2 roadmap, and they can de-risk that migration to proof of stake to a sharded blockchain that's much more scalable in terms of the number of transactions and the type of transactions that can be supported. I think that is like a 2-3 year conversation from now. I think the question is, how confident are you in the speed at which they're actually going to be able to ship against this ETH2 roadmap?
Sure.
And how confident you are in the Beacon chain launch and the benefits of this phase 0 and phase 1 kind of very, very early upgrades as part of the ETH2 cycle here.
Well, as you had in the doc, rollups work now, so that's something where that gives some relief to people. You can basically just, do most of your stuff, outside, and then, transactions outside. Basically the, will ETH2 work? I think we're just going to have to see whether the cross-shard communication works. That's hard. I want to see it work. I think that's the hard part. I'm glad that the Beacon chain launched. I mean, these folks have pulled off some engineering miracles. That is absolutely a very challenging thing to do. And so we'll see.
All anybody can do at this point. What else do you have your eye on from an Ethereum standpoint? And maybe I don't know if we want to go too far into the technicals here, but you mentioned you were invested in some other layer 1 protocols. In a multi-protocol, multi-chain future, how do you think about Ethereum versus these other up-and-comers? Like Avalanche, you mentioned, Near, a couple of others. Are they in the category of potential like application-specific blockchains? And if so, what type of apps do those ultimately compete for? Do you have kind of favorites for what would win gaming or what would win different Web3 applications not named DeFi? Do I have? I don't have favorites yet. I think that when Ethereum first came out, it had a few demo applications. One of them was for like on-chain voting. One of them was for crowdfunding, and I forget what the third one was. This is back in 2015, right? And it turned out that the Hello World for crowdfunding was something that people took that and then went very far with it. And that was the first big thing that worked on Ethereum. First, Ethereum gained traction as an alternative to BTC when people were uncertain about, on-chain volumes. And then second, ICOs and crowdfunding, right? Those are the two big first applications of Ethereum. And now it's DeFi, and which is kind of, you can think of it as like crowdfunding was the first, Wall Streety financial kind of application running on Ethereum, and then others. And so I think whatever the initial Hello World apps, for example, like Oasis is thinking a lot about, and they've been public about this. That's another chain I've got an interest in. Okay, but Oasis by Dawn Song, they've been thinking about private data set sharing. For bioinformatics and so on and so forth. And the reason that's actually important, it sounds like buzzword bingo to say blockchain genomics or whatever, right? And I still think it's early for something like that. However, when you think about genomics or you think about any kind of medical data, it's medical, so it's private,
but to get value out of it, it's statistical, so you need to aggregate it. So the ability to do private aggregations is like a huge thing. And that's actually quite, so you say private aggregations, Zcash is private, but it's not aggregating, right? So private aggregations is like a conceptually complicated thing. It means, you're going to want to support homomorphic encryption or something along those lines. Federated learning, if you're running ML apps or even basic ML stuff, plus some sort of way to ensure that people running those apps aren't getting into individual people's accounts on there. But if you did have something like that, you could have, for example, a chain where people could load in their 23andMe data, but without and get analytics, but without anybody other than themselves having access to that, right? And this is actually something where I am a crypto maximalist in the following sense. You can almost think of there being three eras of the internet. Okay, you have the P2P era, going up until the early 2000s or thereabout, where you made late 90s, early 2000s, where it's all protocols, so like back and forth. Every node is equal to every other node, right? With the rise of the commercial internet, you had the concept of the database-backed website, where the fundamental issue was global state, right? Rather than every node talking to every other node as equals, you had one hub node that would have all of this state, right? All this data, and then all these other spokes around that hub. And that's Facebook, obviously. But that is the design of Dropbox. That's the design of essentially every major website, because the P2P model doesn't have a good answer for sending gigantic amounts of files back and forth. Okay. For example, you're not going to send every single photo you have in Facebook every time to each person, if you're browsing their profile. It just doesn't scale very well. So the new thing that blockchains provide is they provide global state, as you can go back to the P2P model, and now you can have P2P plus global state. So you can go and blow up every single hub, every hub on the internet, over time. We can now take that global state and put that on a chain or decentralized data store of some kind. It doesn't actually have to be a blockchain, right? And so that is like the 20-year vision, where we basically go and destroy every single. I mean, it'll take a while. Okay, I'm not saying it's going to be trivial, but every single hub on the internet we cryptoify and we just destroy it, and or they themselves cryptoify, like Blue Sky is like Twitter's kind of concept on this, and I call that P2P, MVC, CBC, right? So the peer-to-peer model. The model view controller model, if any of your viewers are like web developers or whatever, they'll know what that is. That's just the database-backed website. And then CBC is client, blockchain client, right? Where again, it's like peer-to-peer, except it is a blockchain that is mediating those peer-to-peer connections back and forth, right? So that is somewhat of a different take, which is it's not a blockchain that finds an application, sort of like Ethereum did. It's an application that is built in the CBC way. So, when you ask, where's my head been at this year, this is the type of stuff I'd be like writing up and sketching up, so it's like, just like sort of a different take on it. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll grant you all that. I think it's a helpful kind of mental framing. Maybe a better framing, Alan in the chat talks about memes. Maybe that's where we should start, right? So for example, like what's the best memified pitch of Avalanche? Or Near, or one of the other layer ones that really look just like a substitute for Ethereum. Maybe they're doing something better, faster, cheaper, but at the end of the day, the functionality is ostensibly similar. And we've seen this with, Algorand and several other layer ones recruiting stablecoin integrations from the likes of USDC and other stablecoin developers. I don't know. Is there a meme? Is there a meme? And is that important maybe for helping with the differentiation instead of just siphoning value and looking like you're essentially attacking the Ethereum network during this upgrade process?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like, is it a meme? It's like, Solana, for example, is focusing on, derivatives and trying to do like a decentralized bitmax, right? Perfect. That's like a single application that your new chain is going after. Oasis, as I mentioned, is doing like this private data set sharing. That's how I think it's going to work. each of these chains is something where it's also to some extent going to be a function of the culture of the founders and what they end up doing, because, for example, Dawn being out of academia, she knows lots of other academics that are doing research, and so something like that for Oasis makes sense, where they're doing private data set sharing. So those are like two examples, right? Like going after like a decentralized bitmax or doing data set sharing, and I think each of these hopefully over time finds some initial quote niche that is like that, and then it grows from there.
Said another way, if a protocol does not have a catchy meme, does that mean that by default it is competing with Ethereum?
Or I mean, if it doesn't have a catchy meme, then it doesn't have a use case where it can actually show itself better than Ethereum.
Okay.
Right. So then it's competing, but it's not competing well.
Okay. So sorry. Maybe I missed the. What would you say is Avalanche's meme? You went back to Oasis, but Avalanche or Near, for instance.
I actually don't think Near has a great meme yet. I think that both of them have talked about being more scalable and so on, and we'll see if that works. Mm-hmm. I think right now they're pitching both Avalanche and Near are pitching themselves as higher performance and security and efficiency, but like picking they don't have, to my knowledge at least, and I'm sure they're going to yell at me afterwards or whatever, but they don't have that single application, that single meme, like use it for this. And I think I was mentioning to somebody, nobody would read like the Communist Manifesto or something like that today. It's all hashtags, so it's all memes, right? So it has to at least be a meme that then a bumper sticker that expands into a PhD thesis. I don't think they have those yet. But can you just give me 1 minute? Just give me 1 minute. Sorry.
Sure. All right. We're going to take a quick time out and thank our sponsor at Babel Finance. We're going to have a follow-up event. This was a bit of a surprise event. We wanted to keep the theses under wraps and not get shotgunned by anybody since we spent so much time on this. And so we did not pre-announce the events with Balaji, but we knew that we'd be able to get a good crowd. And sure enough, here we are closing in on 750 for this particular event. So we kept him under wraps for the first event. We're going to have another one next week. I believe all 5 of our guests are confirmed. We're going to be chatting with Babel Finance, with Jeremy Allaire from Circle, talk about USDC and just a mammoth month that they had. If this report was written a few weeks later, he might have cracked our top 10, given the how crazy the last quarter has been for USDC in particular. And then we're going to have a panel with some of the top folks from DeFi this year: Rob Leschner, Will Warren, and one other. I just set this up a little while ago. It's been a busy day, getting canceled and all. But in any case, someone bail me out in the chat, Connor. Who's our third panelist that we just locked down for the DeFi panel next week? Well, you got to tune in because it's going to be a surprise. How's that for you? And I'm intentionally forgetting because I'm also surreptitiously trying to confirm that other person is confirmed before announcing them. In any case, join us next week. This one's going to be an early session, and we'll be probably in the 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. camp to accommodate time zones in the other direction. And just like that, Balaji's back after my commercial break. No rest for the weary, no rest for this guy. Although I'm sure Balaji could take the stage just by himself if we actually needed to do that. All right, so we were talking about Near and Avalanche. I'm not trying to pick on them, right? I like those projects, like those teams as well.
Right.
But I got yelled at too for ignoring all the other interesting, layer one protocols, and the problem is because they don't have a meme, and they are competing on abstracts right now, in my opinion.
Right.
It's very tough to not look at, like, okay, if Ethereum struggles with the upgrade, these are the other folks that are fighting it out. And one of the ways that they're going to fight it out is not just through application specialization, but it's going to actually be using their war chests to incentivize developers.
Totally.
So we've seen this in DeFi like crazy, right? That was a lot of the demand that was pulled forward and a lot of the competition over the summer. What do you think happens now that these layer ones are live? And really, in many cases, it's just the last few months that many of the big ones have come live. How do they steal share if these end up being substitutes versus complements, right? And what are the levers that these teams could pull, either using their war chest and treasury, or otherwise, just hustling or brute forcing their way into relevance aside from Ethereum?
Well, I mean, so not saying that if you are them, right, what you do is you look for the applications that are running on Ethereum now, or the applications that people have wanted to put on Ethereum that are being priced out because of gas, or that for whatever reason are just too hard to do, and then you just market like hell that one thing, whether it's video games or whether it is like derivatives or something like that, and you just go after that. That's what I would do. And that's something where it's not just a technical thing, it's also a social thing. If you're going to want to market, for example, for derivatives, you're going to need the social connections to get to those people who are interested in doing derivatives trading, right? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how it's going to be pulling off. Have you seen those like unbundling of X, unbundling of Y type mm-hmm. diagrams? Right. Mm-hmm. So that's one approach, but it's also a little different in that it wouldn't just be unbundling of ETH. It would be doing applications that can't be done on ETH now for whatever reason, and that's where right now a lot of their pitches for these new chains are quantitative pitches. We're more scalable, we're more this, we're more that, whatever. Fine, okay, but you really want the qualitative pitch, which is we're best for X. Mm-hmm. And then that's something where the quantitative buttresses the qualitative. You're like, we're 3x faster for this and 5x faster for that. And we have, it's 2x easier to get your application out or whatever it is. But the specific is important. That's what mm-hmm. I would do with them if I was them. Agreed.
Let's get into the real sexy topic of the year, DeFi. So Ethereum is the financial internet. I agree with that. I said at Ethereal, I guess it was 2 years ago because they didn't have it this year, to a room full of folks that were all about Web3 applications and non-financial applications, that Ethereum was going to be the DeFi chain, and that was okay. And they should basically just start getting used to it. I think that's borne out for the most part. We saw that with gas fees. That's fine. It's become a settlement network. We'll see what happens as the network scales. But my sense is it feels safe to say that Ethereum, for the foreseeable future, for as long as it's viable, and hopefully that's a long time, it's going to be settlement for high-value transactions. And there was a lot that happened this year. First of all, how closely did you follow the DeFi summer as it was happening? Is this more of like a retrospective where you were kind of like learning, hey, what did I miss, and catching up? Or
I saw the YAM stuff. Mm-hmm. I saw the YAM stuff. I saw the urine stuff. I mean, the thing is that I am just by culture, I'm not an active trader. And, yep. Because that whole culture has come into crypto, and God bless them, But there's too much luck and stress associated with like timing stuff, Mm-hmm. And, it's attractive to see these incredibly high APYs, right? And you're like, wow, I could put in $1 million and I could make $500,000 at 50% APY. But you're always thinking, well, I mean, there could be a smart contract bug. This is yes. pretty, you could lose your entire principal, right? This is pretty high mm-hmm. risk stuff, right? And so because I'm not an active trader, I watched that from, I shouldn't say a distance. I looked at it like I thought it was cool. Uniswap and so on had ENS logging in, but I wasn't actively trading this summer, right? I know that there were people mm-hmm. who made tons of money on, Wi-Fi and I love all of that. Go knock yourself out or whatever. It just like this sounds trite or whatever, but I didn't get into crypto to make money. I got into crypto to make freedom. And so that's sort of where my head has been at, is on the infra type stuff, decentralized internet type things, which is, there's lots of ways to make money in the world, but freedom is actually more precious. And that's where my head has been. So that's why I didn't get into the guts of DeFi, because that wasn't where my interest was specifically this year, though God bless it, right? I'd known about a fair amount of it, but your review actually gave me some bits I hadn't heard about, so that was good.
I think so. First of all, I think you just gave us our talking point for this, entire session. That was great. I didn't get into this to make money, but to make freedom. Good framing, and also you can't have one without the other, right? As we're seeing on the policy fronts, there is still so much that can be taken away from this industry just with the stroke of a pen in many respects. I wonder.
Well, unfortunately, here's the thing. Unfortunately, I want to contest that. I think, unfortunately, I think that is not true. That is to say, China has sort of proven this constrained capitalism model where you can be a millionaire or a billionaire, but you can't be fully free, And unfortunately, I think in many ways that model is coming to the U.S., where the whole cancel culture thing and so on and so forth. Yes, you can keep your head down and build a SaaS app. Great, right? And you know what? That is better than the Soviet Union, right? Like in the sense of where you couldn't even do that, right? But if you're trying to do anything that is outside of an increasingly tight set of ideological lines, you won't be able to do that. And so, unfortunately, I think people have also talked about this. I think Raul and a few other people, Raul Pal. Maybe pronouncing his name wrong. Sorry about that, Raul. Have said, BTC will be sort of locked in KYC and so on and so forth in a few years' time, right? And what that would do is that would allow everybody who is early to get their gains. They'd have their material gains. They would make money, but they would not be free. And so, unfortunately, I do think that's going to be an angle that people are going to offer here as a compromise: make money but not freedom. So we'll see what happens there.
Do we have basically two different ecosystems that emerge? Is DeFi the new Wild West in that paradigm? Right, because you need a financial system. It's all it's fun to talk about decentralizing the web and making sure that you can't be censored, and obviously that's critically important. But if we're actually talking about true sovereignty, you can't be truly sovereign if you don't own your own assets. Right? Like so is DeFi and everything that happened this summer a preview of infrastructure that can and will get built to protect against the day when we might have a whitelisted, centralized Bitcoin and Ethereum ecosystem and a Wild West off the grid, Tor based, truly decentralized and permissionless finance system.
Yeah, and I mean, basically I think DeFi is, well, there are a few things about DeFi this summer that were really particularly good. One was, I think, as you noted, the return of the pseudonymous dev, so that's something actually that's pretty important. Two is it just gives a workout for the entire system. You're moving huge amounts of money, all kinds of attacks, a lot of these infrastructural kinds of things, are just getting a workout with real money. So yeah, I do think it lays the groundwork, but it just, to me, DeFi itself is not the thing. I mean, I'm glad it makes billions and billions of dollars. Amazing, congratulations to everybody involved. It is something which is sort of like, that's why I never got into Wall Street itself, right? Venture is actually quite different from Wall Street, where venture, you're trying to just be right about what the future is like 10 years from now, and you make one trade, whereas Wall Street, timing is very important, and you can be conceptually right, but your timing might be off, and so on and so forth. I always hated that. Whereas if you're betting on a 10-year thing, you've got it. So now, with that said, I think it's something where, as I mentioned with the non-aligned movement concept, this is kind of, people have talked about central banks buying BTC, right? But you can imagine that a lot of smaller countries by 2030 or thereabouts, if they don't want to be beholden to the US or China, start moving more of their functions to, whether it's Ethereum or whatever is the financial internet at that time, they start moving more of their capital formation there because it's neither the US nor China. So that's like how, especially Russia's a candidate for that. It's like Vitalik's like the hometown boy, so to speak. So that is actually where I think kind of things are going. Neither the U.S. nor China. Those would be the folks who might go after it most in like a 5 or 10 year window. We'll see.
We're gonna skip around sections. I don't think. I think it's too late at night for us to talk about stablecoins at length.
You had a comprehensive section on that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, it's an important bit of infrastructure, but it's not very sexy. It's there's I'd say that's like the middleware for the crypto economy. So, and it seemed like we were just starting to pull on a thread that I know a lot of people are going to want to hear about, which is really on the policy side and just the nation building or kind of the new state building side of things. And it goes back to something that you've been, somewhere between obsessed and intrigued with. What's a good word in between those two things when it comes to exit, right? It's really been a passion project of yours, studying this, thinking about what true exit is, what true freedom is at scale, and how you can truly go beyond just like seasteading or waiting for Elon to colonize Mars in order to actually, create new experiments in civilization itself and how we kind of organize states and societies. It strikes me that there is no new dirt in the world, and we are potentially going to need safe physical jurisdictions in which to experiment with some of these applications at scale. Potentially, that's one view of the universe. And at the very least, you could argue this is going to be regionalized, and we're going to need, freedom zones, I guess, or specific, carved out zones where in your particular region, it's kind of safe to play, within certain boundaries. How do you? This is as big or bigger than the money applications and kind of the Web3 applications that we've been talking about, like fundamentally reorganizing like physical actual society, just not just magical internet money. How do you even start to think about the building blocks and how we go from 0 to 1 from an experimentation standpoint? Because it sounds like you think the building blocks are finally there in large part because of crypto and Web3 applications. It's just going to take a long time, but at least we have the right tinder to get the fire started. So let's use that as a jumping off point. There's 20 different points we're going to go out.
Sure. So the first thing I'd say is, like, if you think about the land, the cloud, sea, and then space, right? So there's like 7 to 8 billion people on land, right? There's less than 10 people in space, International Space Station or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. There's about a million, a few 100,000 to a million, 3 million, depending on how you count it, who are on the sea. That's if you include like all cruise ships, all tankers, like snapshot at any given time. I mean, there's a lot of people who are on the ocean, but it's probably sub 1 million, okay, at most times. But now the cloud, you've got a few billion people there. So as a frontier, if you think about the land, the cloud, sea, and then space, look, I'm hugely in favor of what Elon and Bezos are doing. I'm, the richest and the second richest man in the world doing the space race is awesome stuff, right? That's really, really good. That's a good use of capital, And I'm sympathetic to seasteading, though I think it'll probably be cruise ships, and cruise ships have gotten way cheaper this year, and so that's a huge thing for for people to go and look at. One meme I had a long time ago, not that long ago, but crowdfund the crypto cruise ship. I do think that will happen, but I think that in between those, there's something which hasn't been done, and what that is to start building online social networks that have an offline component. And I'll sketch, the kind of thing that I've been thinking about. So basically, if you look at, the United Nations, right? Actually, let me back up for a second. If you think 10 years ago, right? 11 years ago, 2009, if you'd gone to some venture capitalist who's, by the way, incentivized to think about crazy things, okay? So they're not the most open-minded people in the world, but angel investor or whatever. And you said, I want to start a new currency, right? And people would have looked at you like you had four eyes, They said that wasn't seen as being part of the class of things that you could do, It was, were you going to go and petition the IMF or the World Bank? It's going to be decentralized and whatever. You're just kind of weird, a bunch of weird looks. And what happened was Satoshi came up with a way to do that purely on the internet and build strength on the internet, and then turn that around. And then basically, once you had enough strength on the internet, suddenly Bloomberg started listing it, and CNBC started listing it by about 2013. I don't know. You and I were watching, I think, at that time, right? I think we were discussing it on the email list. That was this unprecedented moment where this pure internet phenomenon got listed on Bloomberg and CNBC. We'd never seen anything like it. You remember that? Remember that time, right? And that was only about 4 or 5 years in. And so what happened was, next to all of these blue chip stocks and so on, now it was BTC. Holy cow! Right now, of course, it's not. I mean, we still don't have the ETF, as you ranted about, in a good way in your article, right? It is stupid that doesn't exist, and we have this bizarre grayscale arbitrage thing instead. Which
that's why it's stupid. I mean, let's be clear. That's why it's stupid, because it's so much worse for investors to not have it at this point. Anyway. Yeah, look, big props to Grayscale or whatever. I'm glad that they've got some proxy or whatever for it. That's just the kind of thing where, I know people can make huge amounts of money on it. It's just never been the kind of thing I've been interested in. I just can't bring myself to it's like, whatever. It's fine. It's good. It's good that it's out there. Recursing back up, though, it was insane. It was crazy to start a new currency 10 years ago. Right. Now, I think the next step is to figure out how to start new cities and eventually new countries. And I think that, the way you would do this, I had this tweet a while back that went fairly viral or whatever. Here, I'll just read this. So how to start a new city, build a community in the cloud, organize economy around remote work, enforce laws with smart contracts, practice in-person norms of civility, simulate architecture in VR, eventually crowdfund territory and materialize city into the real world, right? And the key here is going cloud first, land last, build a community first online, and then once you've got a sufficiently large community, you can crowdfund land. Okay? And that's interesting because, there's no limit to how large these online communities can get. What hasn't happened is for them to actually be cultures. I mean, you've got the rudiments of this stuff. You have Facebook groups, obviously, you have subreddits and so on and so forth. But what you don't have is something that is an online community that, a social network with a sense of national consciousness and a plan to crowdfund territory. That hasn't been done. Now, I think this is very possible because, again, if you go back, to that crazy thing of, you're going to have a currency with the IMF or the World Bank recognizing it. Now, once you built strength on the internet, right? Now, today, the IMF and the World Bank does recognize it. Very much so, right? Christine Lagarde has written about it. She's actually pretty smart about, a bunch of the stuff she recognizes that's important. There's not a single bank in the world, not a single financial institution in the world 10 years later that hasn't taken note of this thing. Yeah. So the thought is, okay, you build, how would you go about doing it? Well, you have a virtual reality community with virtual currency built in, and you have a culture there, you have norms, you have a civilization, and you have people building what I call the network state, and you essentially accumulate cryptocurrency in the cloud, and you have individuals and groups being like community founders that will, let's say, crowdfund a ranch in Texas, or they'll crowdfund a building in Japan and so on, and they're all networked together. It's like a fractal polity. A good analogy is if you think about Google's offices, right? Google has offices all over the world. If you go to Google offices, their map of these things,
And whether you go into the one that's in Denmark or in India or Japan or whatever, it's got a consistent aesthetic, right? It's got the Google logo. You present your badge, bing, you're in. It's got probably like the same snacks or whatever. It just feels it's like intentionally meant to feel like Google anywhere in the world. The same colors and whatnot. And we've already seen this, of course, with multinationals and so on. Starbucks burns its coffee the same way all around the world, right? And so that's why it's like a home away from home.
Mm-hmm.
What hasn't yet been done is to do that for a community. And so you could have something where you have a community of 100,000 or 1 million people that owns territory all over the world in fractal chunks. And this might be a building where 3 people live, but this might be a town where 10,000 people in that million-person thing live. And this might be, an entire skyscraper, which they all just bought out together, right? And they all consider themselves part of the same community, okay, the same digital country. Now, a very important thing with BTC and with crypto in general, which I think we underappreciate, is the extent to which it permitted dual boot, okay? It did not require you to just flip entirely into the Bitcoin economy in 2009. Okay, you didn't have to liquidate everything and then join it. Part of the reason was that economy didn't exist, right? Speculation is installation. We've been speculating that whole thing into existence, the glorious random walk of the price over the last 11 years, right? In some future historian, they'll just look boom up and to the right for the most part, right? But as you know, there's been quite a lot of reversals and crazy things that have happened over that period. In the same way, you have something where you don't require people to give up citizenship in their physical country. They're just conceptually citizens of this thing. They believe themselves to be, just like, for example, a Bitcoin holder might be, still an American. They might still hold dollars. But they just know that dollars are bad and are getting inflated and so on and so forth. And it's a necessary evil, but they're not forced to liquidate all dollars for BTC right away. So that dual boot allows people to be sort of mentally part of this digital community wherever they may live, and but then eventually, they crowdfund territory. And so what are your stages? You don't go immediately to sovereignty. You're not like, okay, right away you're sovereign. First of all, sovereignty itself is a continuum. What you just do is you build up credibility, and as you start crowdfunding larger and larger pieces of territory, there's all this unincorporated land around the world, by the way. Starting a new city is not illegal. You can just, in different countries, they've got different rules, but they've got bare piece of land. You can go and incorporate it. So as you go and build up, you start these cities, you build credibility, and then the next steps become more interesting. Maybe you do a deal with an existing sovereign. You pay $1 billion for some uninhabited island or peninsula, and you're like, we'll pay you this money. And okay, here in this territory, this peninsula that you're not using, crypto's completely legal.
Yeah.
Right?
Mempool, I'm not just nodding along. I know. So I've been talking to Balaji about this for a couple months now, and I know which different threads we're gonna pull on. So don't worry, we're gonna go into all the details here. So Balaji, first thing that stands out in the comments right now, Helena says, "Cloud first, land last." Sounds like an absolute clusterfuck, right? So. And
I'm not seeing this, but go ahead. Yeah.
No, this is a little bit further up, right? There's been a lot of chatter around this, and then she also had a couple of other things in here about this not necessarily being a platonic ideal to port internet communities into the real world, which I agree. This goes all the way back to Nakamoto earlier this year, right? Before coronavirus, exploded everything in terms of your grand plans for Nakamoto earlier in the year. You had put together a killer list of folks, I think with some of the same ethos that you're trying to espouse now for these early experiments in terms of bringing in-person civility to the cloud, right? Because there's there's
someone really mad online. Go ahead, yeah.
Well, yeah, there's always someone mad online, but I think this is important because can this be done in chat rooms, or is the other dual boot that we need first something like Decentraland or some metaverse applications where people will actually settle the virtual realm before they go crowdsource funding for a small enclave, somewhere physically in the world?
So do you need Decentraland first? I like
Well,
Decentraland.
it's a two-part question. One, can you actually bootstrap a civil, healthy community that can cross this chasm strictly online and chat and video and email lists or whatever? Or does it need to be a virtual realm? And if so, how far away are we from actually seeing a metaverse that works? Or will it happen in a sub-community of a gaming ecosystem, for instance?
So I think the metaverse kind of stuff is getting much closer than people think. VR is like crypto in the sense of it's just been getting better and better and better over the last few years. Like the Oculus headset is actually phenomenal. You also called it out actually in your review as being there's not a single person who's used the Quest that I've talked to who didn't have like a wow when they put it on this year. And the Quest 2 just came out, which is like a big improvement. So VR has improved a great deal, and the metaverse is very much within reach. I think that the reason I would build it online as the primary, though, is not just because it's within reach, but because it's like the capital of a state that can never be invaded. Mm-hmm. If you have something where the primary entity is online and eventually on chain, right, where those files are hosted in, and your private keys are not just your the access to your assets, but they're your login. Just like actually that's already happening now when you log in with DNS, right? You log in with Ethereum. When your private keys are your login, you have a fully secure fortress online. It is something which is protected by cryptography. It's a virtual state that can't be invaded. And you'd have to go to 1 million people worldwide and go and seize their private keys to actually break the community, which is very hard, right? So that would be, from an operational standpoint, that's why you would want to design it like that, where any one projection down of that community into physical space is just a projection, just a printout. Mm-hmm. And this is actually something I'm not sure, we've talked about this, but, my concept of like a scanner, so you have a piece of paper, then you have a scanner, and then you have like a natively digital object, like a text file, right? You have a dollar bill, you have PayPal, and then you have something natively digital like cryptocurrency, right? You have Stanford University, you have Coursera, which is like the scanner, it just takes those courses and uploads them, at least at first. And then you have sort of natively digital online education, which is coming, And so we haven't had is like the natively digital state, the one that was built from that as the ground up, where it started on the internet, cloud first, land last.
Meltem, I knew was finally going to get her question upvoted enough, and I knew we were going to get to this point of the conversation to get tangible here. She asks, when Citadel?
When Citadel? So I don't actually look, if folks want to go and do a Citadel, but I don't actually like the concept of Citadel, and here's why. The Citadel idea is sort of like, there's going to be a group of people who are in the Citadel and they've just got guns out and just, and the rest of the world is done, and it's like Mad Max kind of thing. Like that's kind of how people think about, these Citadels. Mm-hmm. And that's never been what I think of as the right. That's never been, well, first of all, one of the issues is you have to be incredibly autarkic for that to work. You need to be able to, there's this great book called The Knowledge, where it goes into how to build civilization from scratch. But in order to have a functioning Citadel where the rest of the world is effed and you've got something that's there, you need to be able to do not just water purification, but every single material good around you from, like your doors, your chairs, whatever, you need to be able to build all those things, right? You need to internalize your supply chain somehow. That's really hard to do. And I think I've always been much more interested in, crypto anarchy is cool, but I've always been much more interested in crypto civilization. Mm-hmm. Okay. And crypto anarchy is good relative to anarchy, because what it means is that there's a degree of order in the digital space over total anarchy. But I think ideally what you have is crypto civilization, where you pull more laws, more things into crypto, and then it just takes fallible people and has them behave in more pro-social ways. And so then you don't have to try to live in a citadel with, I don't know, 10,000 or 20,000 people. Instead, you have a civilization that you're in, and you don't have to. I mean, the goal is to use crypto to rebuild high trust civilizations. We may be going through a low trust moment where everyone's wearing a mask outside, and nobody talks about anything with a random person like this. That is this transitional thing that's absolutely happening now. On the other side of it, though, I think that what happens is people regroup into high trust communities because trust reduces transaction cost, and it's worth paying one high transaction cost or one high cost to get into a low transaction cost environment.
I think I agree with that. The other reason that makes sense to me is we're so early with VR that it's going to be dominated by one or two companies now, right? So it's ultimately just another community to get the platform from. I think in the short to medium term, as good as the Oculus is getting, and as good as some of these other applications are getting.
That's the thing. By the way, Oculus is not the only thing out there in VR. It's great, but there's also open source stuff and so on. And I think that's what at least I would want to build on.
Yeah, I mean, have you looked at the metaverse applications that are crypto first, right? Like Decentraland and Axie Infinity and some of the gaming oriented ones?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on them?
So I think actually Decentraland is executed fairly well. We actually listed Mana, on Coinbase a long time ago. I don't have any interest in it, or I shouldn't say I don't have any financial interest in it, but I keep, checking up on it, and it has more traction than I thought it did. I think that we don't yet know what pieces people are going to want to monetize. I think that one of the biggest things is going to be building virtual economies in these zones that are not based on speculation. And one of the macro concepts I have, and this came with Earn, is that there is the best form of digital good is, I would argue, your time. Mm-hmm. Because you're the monopoly provider of your time, you can market it, and it is a digital good that can be sold for digital currency. So having consulting environments, having ways that people can sell their time in digital environments helps bootstrap digital economies. Earn was it's actually doing quite well, right now. I'm not sure if you know about that. That was a missing thing from your document, Ryan. But Earn has done, I'm not sure if they've disclosed stats on it, but did a $100 million deal with Seller alone, tens of millions of dollars in crypto that's being given out. And then CoinMarketCap actually cloned Earn. They used actually all the same copy. Did you see that?
Yeah, and don't they call it Earn too?
They call it Earn, which is great. I mean, that's how it's successful, right? Because it's something which they didn't just clone it, they cloned the exact language and so on, because it's like a proven working thing. Why did I bring up Earn? Well, so Coinbase Earn is just a subset of the Earn functionality, but Earn essentially allows you to turn time into money. And that is something which I think is a more fundamental basis for a virtual economy than speculation. Mm-hmm. Right? And so digital consulting is at least where I'm interested in. There's tons you can do with that. That's a whole thing. But so that's why, Decentraland and so on, they're great, but it seems like it's more focused on land speculation, which is one way to bootstrap an economy. But I would want to have something which it may not go as high at the beginning, but it has a more sustainable long-term thing, which is selling your time for money, whether that's engineering or bug fixes or what have you.
Well, I tend to think that Decentraland is going to end up a really wild VR version of Vegas. At least I hope it does, because that'll mean that it's successful, right?
I wish the best for them. I'm not against them at all. Yeah.
If there's casinos and digital art, museums and a red light district and everything else, it seems like those will be the first applications that convert time into money, because they always are. And basically, gambling has been the killer early app in every single iteration of crypto that I can think of, going all the way back to Satoshi Dice, and then arguably with ICOs, and then DeFi over the summer. I don't think you can really get away from the gamesmanship element, and quite frankly, I know that I want to play blackjack with folks. And just have like a little bit of escapism, since we haven't seen anyone this year. God bless you. But I guess what's the timeline for something like this, right? Because in a start, the network state, that is, in a startup, you can start small, you can kind of find your niche, and then you can kind of expand, over time into new markets. But what you're proposing, you really have to start almost crypto persona first, and then think about like, okay, who would cross the chasm from being like a crazy crypto person to a crazy, I want to actually build a new frontier, and a crypto civilization. That's in and of itself a big leap, but it's really only one archetype of person that might be interested in
absolutely
affecting their current country. Can these things get booted up concurrently, or does this have to be sequentially? Do you have to? Which are the two items you're saying? Do you have to create the roadmap for other sub communities to rise up and create these similar cloud cities?
Right. So at least the way that I'm doing it is I'm trying to write up like a long form document that would just go into all of this. But the way I think about it is, look, I mean, I like crypto. I like a lot of the technology in the space. The people vary in terms of their motivations for being in the space, right? And there's folks who are they're not necessarily future aligned. There's folks who are in crypto just to make money, right? Mm-hmm. And that's like the kind of group that I'd probably want to filter out, in the sense of that's just, so I would not, my point is, I wouldn't necessarily bootstrap this with crypto people qua crypto people, I'd actually say like a better vector is if you're interested in crypto and transhumanism and Mars and so on and so forth, right? So that is a different filter than I'm interested in, crypto. So not to blow up what you just said, okay? I don't mean this in a bad way, but if you're crypto and gambling and this and that, that's a different kind of person than crypto and Mars and transhumanism, right? Yep. It's fine for gambling. Look, I mean, if people want to go and do gambling, that's great. However, that wouldn't be like the first 10 or 100. That's not, like the occasional Vegas trip, who cares, right? But if that's like their primary interest, that's why I wouldn't want to bootstrap it from crypto itself, but that subset of crypto that's like the early folks that are more interested in freedom and technology and so on than money per se. Like I think of it as sort of like truth, health, and wealth. Like wealth is important, but it's kind of third. You have to figure out what's true first, and then like actually have your health, and then wealth is like it's there, but it's not. You shouldn't say it's zero, but it's all. If you're putting it as first, people kind of have missed a priority sometimes. Anyway, go ahead.
Let's talk about some of the other building blocks then. I think you've gone on at length about decentralized DNS. And obviously, having some cryptocurrencies, in this economy, I think would be important. You and I have both become enthralled with social monies and community tokens. Is that maybe a linchpin that can get people excited about this, or does that get more into you're in this for the wrong reasons territory, right? Like, absolutely. I'm just trying to think of like what incentive schemes you can get for people to actually stick around to you don't want to gamify it in the sense of having people make a major life decision like this and have it feel just like Ready Player One. But you need something that doesn't turn it into like a school board meeting where 15 people show up and then they're like, I'm sick or I want to watch Netflix tonight, so I'm going to pass on this one. Right? Like, what's the stickiness element to it that gets the hardcore people, there each and every week and then every day, and as you go through the bootstrapping process?
That's a great question, and I think so. I do think you need to build a digital economy, and that's something where there have to be sort of like product milestones. But I think that the power of an idea is an idea, like that Victor Hugo thing, like an idea whose time has come. People are very dissatisfied with existing governments, not just in the U.S. but around the world. I don't know if you've seen. There's Martin Gurri's book, The Revolt of the Public, or Moses Naim, The End of Power. All these protest movements that are happening, and what I think is really the case is that very like any institution built for the internet may not survive the internet. Okay, it's just this acidic thing where your institutions were not built for peer-to-peer. Peer-to-peer means that all kinds of older hierarchies kind of break down. Now, by the way, what you might do is you might have a peer-to-peer thing that opts into a new hierarchy, and that's a stable one that everybody has assented to. That may be something where you kind of rebuild consent, where you have something where everybody feels that they chose to be there, and if they didn't choose to be there, then they can choose to not be there, and they have total control and freedom. And it's not a 4-year or 2-year election cycle. They can just leave if they don't like it, And a virtual community has that level of liquidity, a physical community less so. But I think that with technology, we can keep reducing the barrier to exit. We can make it cheaper and cheaper for you to pull all your stuff, and just leave if you don't like it. So I think you need the economy, but the reason I mentioned the idea is that because of this dissatisfaction with existing governments, there's already a driving force. People's seat has been set on fire, so to speak, and so they're looking for something else. Number one, and then the third thing is so first is you have the day to day. Second is they have the dissatisfaction with their physical day to day, and the third is the dream of something better, which for me, and at least for the first one of these that we might do, the first network state, transhumanism. That's actually much closer than people think. That is to say, the technologies are out there to restore sight, to the blind, to cure deafness. I know that sounds crazy, but they're there. If you go to my website, Balajis.com, there's an article, The Purpose of Technology. I've got some links there. And will it work for every form of deafness or blindness? Not yet, but there's a lot of progress here. And so miracles are actually possible. The reason we don't have them yet is because we don't have jurisdictions that allow rapid utilization of biomedical technologies. You can't actually go bench to bedside. It's bench to 10 years of FDA approval and then bedside. And if it takes 10 years to get a drug through, we might be able to start a new country in less time than that. And the reason I say that is, think about 10 years ago. 10 years, crypto is nothing, right? Bitcoin is probably, I think it's at $0 or it's like 0.1 cents or something. We've come a long way in 10 years. So when you've got a 10-year time frame, a lot can be done in that time. And so I think that'd be the third thing, is the ideological move to build something better. So it's the economics, it is the dissatisfaction with the current environment, and it's the ideological drive. Those would be, I think, the things that would turn it from just, a school board meeting or whatever, hopefully.
There's another element to this where you said, you need truth, health, and wealth, maybe in that order. Truth is something that you've thought a lot about this year, particularly with respect to the media, right? And I think this applies to basically all information. And then, arguably it applies to the rules of engagement when you're talking about discourse in these cloud cities and kind of the early iterations of these communities. How do you ensure, how do you promote truth? How do you promote kind of good behavior and suss out bad actors or bad citizens in this type of environment? Do we actually have the tools there for people to become citizen journalists and productive members of these new frontier communities? And is that something that crypto solves, or do you still need like a philosopher king at the helm and all hail King Balaji? It's a serious question. I think, some people, you and other leaders, can pull people through and get them excited about an idea. But at the end of the day, even if it's quote unquote decentralized, people are still looking for leadership, right? So,
sure.
Does this become Balaji's accidental dictatorship?
No.
Or are there other, token curated incentives or other schemes to keep that ethos alive?
No, and the reason is basically like, once what at least what I'm trying to do is innovate on the mechanism for starting something new. Mm-hmm. And with that mechanism, anyone can start their own network state. And so it's something like, imagine if Bitcoin had been built to fork, right? This is a very different world, I'm not saying that would be the right choice for Bitcoin necessarily, but I think that for a state, you have to have some concept of de gustibus non disputandum, like maybe I'm mispronouncing that, but basically there's no accounting for taste. People are going to want different things. They're going to want different leaders. And the opposite of being dictator of the world, which I think is a terrible ambition, actually, because for all kinds of reasons, the opposite of being that is, there's actually, by the way, there's two different motivations for people to be CEO of something. One is, they want to control other people, but number two is they don't want to be controlled, right? Mm-hmm. And so the reason to do a new state is to actually have a degree of freedom, not necessarily to impose control, minimum necessary control. That is how I kind of think about it. So innovate on the mechanism such that, think of it as what venture capital did over the last 20, 30, et cetera years is it came up with a set of frameworks for how to start a new company, right? And over the last 5 years, 10 years, we've figured out frameworks for how to start a new currency or token, and there's more ways being developed. You can, for example, start with a centralized database and then freeze it and then pull it on chain. You can start with a token and then pull it onto its own chain. There's like more and more mechanisms that are being developed. So this is a mechanism for starting a new country. And we'd pilot it with one concept of I think building a cloud country that was focused on transhumanism, but you could very well fork that and have something that was doing veganism or that was interested in reviving Latin as a dead language, just like the Israelis revived Hebrew, mm-hmm. And so that I think that's the answer. Is this is related to another concept, which is decentralization doesn't mean an absence of leaders, but an abundance of them. You basically, like, the more decentralization you have, the more centralization you can justify. Because if you can easily exit, then you are more willing to tolerate and, in fact, embrace strong leadership. Because you can do one of two things. Number one, you can exit to another leader, or number two, you can become your own leader. Right? Mm-hmm. So there's a path for citizens and a path for founders. And so you have alternatives. And so long as you have those alternatives, that ethically justifies the current scenario. That's kind of how I think about it.
Well, I know everybody's going to be keeping a close eye on your Twitter for future announcements on this.
Sure.
And I'm glad that you caught at the 11th hour my references where I almost accidentally scooped you despite all of your help this year.
Sure. That's fine.
So just for everybody's benefit, we had 121 theses. I think we've pretty well covered the policy element, the kind of Web3 and metaverse and NFT. We didn't talk about NFTs per se. We touched on a lot of those concepts from that section. Bitcoin, Ethereum, obviously. There are a lot of middle sections that we didn't really get to, and it gets to like the guts of the financial economy around crypto, right? But I want to assure everybody, if you're looking for information about DeFi, stablecoins, crypto credit, synthetic assets, all those things that we didn't touch on that are kind of right at the heart of the theses, we're going to cover that next Wednesday, 11 to 1, with some really great guests that are going to be able to touch on that. Having said that, I do want to do maybe one last speed round. Balaji, while I look through the questions and tee up some of the best ones as I see them, what other big takeaways do you have for this year? Or things now that we've had an almost 2-hour conversation that we didn't get to, but are in the miscellaneous bucket on your to-do or to-watch list with respect to different crypto communities, or maybe now is a good time to bring back the people to watch question now that we've gotten warmed up?
Well, so I'll just do a few things I've been thinking a lot about. I've talked about to some extent. Number one, the pseudonymous economy. Mm-hmm. So I gave a talk on this last year. I think it's becoming more and more pressing. I think that's one of the great things about DeFi and so on is we're starting to build, essentially we're building a country Wall Street first. It's like crypto is starting with the Wall Street and then it's going to build the Main Street on top of it. I think a lot of people don't understand that part. And because you need that financialization to bring people in large amounts of money, and then a transaction for a small amount of money is nothing by contrast, right? You've had these systems that are being worked out with $1 million transactions, and there's incentives for people to hack it, and they haven't hacked it. So I think we're starting to now have the infrastructure to start building a pseudonymous economy where you log in with your ENS and you earn with that, and you start actually breaking things out so that you use your real name on official documents when you need to. You have your pseudonym for speaking, and then another pseudonym for earning, just like an HD wallet, but with HD names. Okay, so HD names, and you can you log into a site, you earn karma under one pseudonym, then you can zero knowledge transfer it to another. I think that's a very important primitive that we're going to need because real names weren't built for the internet. Like, quote unquote, the concept of real name was something that's like a state imposed thing. If you go and read this book, Seeing Like a State, like the people in South America, their quote real name is not actually Hernandez or what have you, it was imposed by the Spanish. And so the concept of real names is a state imposed thing. It's also an offline thing that wasn't meant for being online. Basically, it wasn't meant for you to be search indexed. Like this, there's a huge impedance mismatch between how real names were historically developed and how they're currently being used. And so what people are going to do is, I think, develop more and more search resistant identities and start separating things out so that any rando can't just put together a file with everything on you, right? Now, a lot of millennials are in that sort of transitional thing where you have your real name on the internet and so on. But pseudonymity is a very, very, very big and important thing, and we should invest much more in that. And I think actually, and this is an important thing, I think this actually very, I shouldn't say bipartisan, it's extremely popular across many different segments of society. If you think about Reddit, it's an almost entirely pseudonymous community. Mm-hmm. Ryan, what's up? Fist? Oh, no, I got it.
No, sorry. I just had an itch.
Oh, okay.
All right. So why don't we finish up with a lightning round of sorts? I think we talked a bit about different policy risks, both next year and kind of future technical risks. If you had to pick one single biggest risk in 2021, something that would prevent us from actually going through another bull run, what would it be? And by the way, I get a little bit concerned just because it seems like everybody is just so definitive that this is going to be like the next bull cycle, and it's like a foregone conclusion we're going to get on 100,000. And I didn't feel like that at the end of 2016 going into 2017 that we were going to see a 20x spike in price. Is it different now that everybody's expecting it? I don't know. But what's the risk that would rain on that parade given all the momentum we have going into the end of the year?
Well, the obvious driver is about 6 months after the halving, usually the fireworks start, and then it goes up. At least that's been what's happened. It's soared a few months after the halving, and then it's crashed. And so up 50x and then down 90%, but it's up 10x or whatever overall, Mm-hmm. So Bitcoin going from 10 to 1,000, then back down to a few hundred, right? Or from 400 to 20,000, then back down to 3,000, something like that, right? So that's the obvious reason I think that people think it's going to go all the way up to 100K. It is funny, by the way. Bitcoin may be the first $1 trillion coin. It's going to be mine that coin rather than mint that coin. MMT hardest hit. Haha. I think that's funny. But actually, this guy has a good list over here. But major bug, regulators, Tether blow up. Mt. Gox, interesting risk factor. That's interesting. I haven't followed every blocking and tackling aspect of that, but that would flood the market with new BTC. That's true. That's amazing that is still going on 7 years later. That's crazy. But yeah, I think the regulatory attack is the really interesting one. And we'll see. Now, one thing, there's a very good graph, though, very important graph, which I've seen from a few different sources now, which show that starting in around January, crypto really started coming off exchanges.
Yes.
And one of the reasons for that, I think, thanks to DeFi, people are using crypto off exchanges. They're actually using it off exchanges. And so I think that is one of the big catalysts for people pulling their crypto locally. And that's really, really good. That's extremely good that started like a year ago. It's not 100%, but the more crypto that can be moved off exchanges, the better. And exchanges should also figure out how to be as decentralized as possible, consistent with applicable law and so on and so forth. So, but yes, I think that list of risks is pretty good. But yeah, regulation, Tether blow up, BTC, ETH major bug. I think those are the three big ones. I actually agree with this guy's list.
Another one that was upvoted, and I'd put this in a pretty big risk. I don't know if it's in the 2021 bucket or if it's just something that's going to be a risk for the next few years until ETH2 fully launches. But are there any flaws in Vitalik's assessment of security cost differences between proof of stake, proof of work, and how do you think about security guarantees based on all of the proof of stake protocols and all of that, all of the research that's gone into this particular aspect of blockchains over the course of the last couple of years? Could we fail, or is this safer now?
Vitalik's a very smart guy. The ETH research, they have done a lot of work on staking. There's difference between theory and practice. It has to be actually deployed, and we'll see. My main thing is I'm just glad that there's a bunch of different coins with different consensus models, because the attack on one of them will be qualitatively distinct from the attack on another one. Mm-hmm. And so you have sort of robustness because, for example, proof of stake has one major advantage over proof of work in that you don't have mines, like an actual Bitcoin mining data center is not very portable. Whereas with staking, you can move from anywhere to anywhere. So it's much more geographically easy to insulate. But proof of work has a huge advantage over proof of stake in that you can distinguish the longest chain from the most computation, by the most computation, but that's not, as doable with proof of stake, right? Your proof of stake doesn't have, the longest chain is not determined by the maximum computation per se, because you're using stake voting as opposed to, compute. And so those are different failure modes. And it's good that you've got two systems with different failure modes, because then you get robustness through it. That's my meta for it. I can't guarantee, obviously, that any system is going to work until it ships and it's out there. But I'm rooting for them.
One last one, and then I might answer a couple here before we get going. The James asks, going back to cloud cities, what enabling apps and infrastructure are still needed to make these a reality? I think we talked about a lot, so maybe just prioritizing what should we be working on to make them a reality.
Make the network stake a reality. Mm-hmm. I'd say virtual reality, virtual currency. I'd say so those two, and I think also we need to have favorable regulatory environments. So rather than just simply, a lot of people are sort of stuck in the mindset of thinking of U.S. national politics as being the most important thing. And it's important, but it's not the only thing, because you can go below at the state level and you can try and get, for example, a sanctuary state for crypto, what Wyoming is or trying to be. Maybe it's Texas, and a state that has enough weight to throw around, just like with federal marijuana laws and so on and so forth. I think that's one approach where it may not be legal everywhere, but if it's legal somewhere, that's a big deal, number one. And then you can also go global, and you can go to hundreds of countries. So the infrastructure that we need to build, there's a technical of VR and virtual currency, but the regulatory infrastructure is very important. And then part of the way you build that is with media, because we need to be able to graduate from blog posts and tweets to, if not feature films. The only reason I say not feature films is the feature film is maybe a model that was, ideal for the 20th century. Today, perhaps the 140-second video is a new haiku. Where it's built for Twitter, and maybe all your content is open source and it's memeable and whatnot, using Creative Commons type licensing. So I think very much upstream of, regulation or policy are the memes in people's heads, and that's media. And so, that would be the other piece of infrastructure, right? So on the technical side, virtual reality, virtual currency. On the non-technical side, it'd be media and regulation, and those are actually intrinsically linked to a much greater extent than people think. Because regulators are just like everybody else. They read the press, they look at videos, and they base their assumptions on what they read in the press and what they see in Hollywood. It really is like that. So if you see lots of videos of corporate bad guys or so on, lots of negative things, and people have a negative association, versus if the community makes positive videos. If we show, for example, people in Nigeria using Bitcoin, when the state is going after them, when they're in Venezuela, when they're in the Middle East, crypto as a tool for freedom, as a tool to protect individual rights, then we'll tell our own story. And I think we can do a phenomenal job of that. We just haven't done that. And I think that's definitely something to prioritize way beyond, I shouldn't say way beyond the technical, but it has to be on par with the technical. Founding influencer on par with the founding engineer.
Balaji, this is amazing. 30 seconds, final statement. What you got?
Final statement. Buy Bitcoin. No, just kidding.
I wrote that on like page 5 of the report, right? If you stop reading now and just buy Bitcoin, and like you get that one part of the thesis right, you're going to be along for the ride. And sometimes it takes people a cycle to experience that roller coaster at the price, and then they see it doesn't die, and then they actually dive into the next step of the journey. So,
so here's my 30 seconds. Then
would be my half a second. But what's your 30?
Here, 30 second is learn screenwriting, make short movies. And so screenplays basically are not that hard to write. You just need to start with your characters and your environments. A 2 or 3 page screenplay will probably give you enough for a 140-second video, and start actually bumping up the production values of pro crypto stuff. If you start, if you have crypto people, if they can make slide decks. If they can make slide decks, they can make movies. And we need to actually start doing way, way, way more content, because institutions are not going to produce content and media that is favorable. And so the decentralized internet needs to actually explain the decentralized internet, and needs to actually do that in its own terms. And so learn screenwriting, learn editing, and make movies and put them online.
Awesome. Well, there's never a shortage of memes in crypto, and I'm sure I already have seen a bunch of memes during this conversation in our internal Slack, giving me a hard time for a variety of things. And I'm sure we're going to see a lot of the follow through on Twitter from this conversation. It's been great. It's been a marathon, 2 full hours, and we'll be back here next week from 11 to 1 to tackle the other half of the theses that Balaji and I, shockingly in 2 hours, did not get to. But Balaji, thanks again for the support this year, and for being early to sound the alarm on coronavirus, and generally being sage with your predictions and advice going through a pretty tumultuous year. So looking forward to what 2021 has in store for all of us and for you and the network state.
Thank you, Ryan.
I'll let you go.
Awesome.
And I'll wrap this thing up. Thanks, Balaji.
Thank you.